Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Miller, project manager for this project, a focused look at fish and wildlife habitat, where we will be considering updates to our Washington County's Goal 5 program for natural resources. On behalf of the project team, I want to warmly welcome you to the first meeting of our Technical Advisory Committee for the Focus Look project. We're so excited to share information and learn from you and get your feedback on this important topic. We especially appreciate your time commitment and support as we begin. We also have some community members present and listening into the meeting, so welcome. And there will be an opportunity toward the end of the meeting for you to provide a short comment or questions if you have them to the committee. So those paying attention may have noticed a new name change on this to our committee. We're going back to using the term a technical advisory committee. As we started talking about the project, we wanted to be more clear that the role and nature of this committee is to provide technical expertise and advice on the project. So we're reverting back to calling it a technical advisory committee. No worries, everything else will remain the same. Next slide, please. So here's a quick overview of today's agenda that we'll be going over in more detail shortly. The TAC members have the ability to talk throughout the meeting, and it is being recorded, and anyone can listen in to the meeting. And there's a chance for the public to ask questions and comment briefly at the end. Next, we're going to start with some brief introductions of the project team. So next slide. I'm Michelle Miller, Senior Planner in Community Planning, a long-range planning section of Land Use and Transportation Department here at the county. I've been working on our natural resource standards for a few years now, and many of you are familiar faces. And then next, we're going to go through county staff and then turn it over to Kathleen Corliss from MIG. She's the project manager consultant on the project and the introduction of their team. Teresa?
Hi, thanks, Michelle. I'm Teresa Cherniak, principal planner for community planning. So all the work that's been happening on the significant natural resource assessment originally and the regulations are all in my section. And Michelle and the other planners work for me within that section. And Suzanne?
Yes, I'm Suzanne Savin, senior planner, and I've been with the county for a while, but I am new to this particular project, so I'll be helping Michelle out wherever I can. Emily?
Yes, Emily Brown. I'm a planning assistant with this group.
Hi, I'm Kathy Corliss. I'm a principal with MIG APG. So I don't know if those of you that don't know, APG merged, Angelo Planning Group merged with MIG about a year and a little bit ago. And so I'm leading the consulting side of the project, land use primarily. And with me, supporting me are Kate Rogers and Brandon Crawford. And Brandon's with me at the meeting today. Say hi, Brandon. There he is.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brandon Crawford. I'm planner with MIG APG.
And then we have as a subconsultant doing the environmental side, David Evans and Associates. And Ethan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ethan Rosenthal with David Evans and Associates, DEA. And I'm an ecologist. I've been with DEA for about 24 years, and I'll be helping out with the habitat inventory. And then we have another staff, Sarah Gilbert. She's our GIS expert. She's not in the meeting today, but she'll be helping out a lot on the project. Thanks.
So next slide, please. With that, we'll turn over to the introduction of our technical advisory committee, and we'll go in the order that you see it on this slide, starting with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Joy Vaughn. Joy, are you here?
Joy here, but no, we've got no volume on your microphone.
Oh.
Okay. Oh, all right. Joy, we can come back to you and yep. Okay.
I think I didn't see Eric or Mike here yet. So let's I do see Amanda. I saw Amanda come in to the meeting.
Yes, good afternoon. So I'm Amanda Punton. I'm the Natural Resource Specialist with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And so I primarily help with trying to understand what the rules for Goal 5 say needs to be done.
And hi, everyone. I'm Laura Kelly, also with DLCD, Portland Metro Area Regional Representative.
And Glenn couldn't make it today from Metro, so we'll go to Damon.
Good afternoon. I'm Damon Reishi. I'm the Development Services Division Manager at Clean Water Services. And I've worked with our vegetated corridor requirements for a number of years, which are somewhat related to this topic. And Lindsay is with me here today as well. Lindsay.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. I'm Lindsay Obermiller. I'm the Senior Environmental Plan Reviewer, as Damon said, working with our vegetated corridor and sensitive area standards with development.
All right, that means I guess I'm next. I'm Bruce Barbarash, Tualatin Hills Park and Rec District. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Nature and Trails Manager for the district. We serve about 50 square miles over on the east side and maintain about 1,700 acres of natural area.
I didn't see Rachel yet, so how about you, Rob?
I'm here.
Oh, you are? Oh, hi, Rachel.
Hi, everyone.
I didn't want to miss you. Sorry about that.
No worries. I'm Rachel Marble. I'm a senior planner with the City of Hillsborough and Development Services. I'm the project manager for we just kicked off our technical update of our significant natural resource code. So much more limited than this project, but happy to be here.
Great.
Everyone, I'm Rob Zeller, senior planner with the City of Beaverton, and I'm the project manager for the Cooper Mountain Community Plan, which is an area covered by this work.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephen Shane. I've been with Washington County now for about 16 years, pretty much evenly split between development review and long-range planning. At this point, I'm currently the principal planner for current planning. I have my undergraduate degree was in environmental science. I was a professional biologist with the federal government for about 11 years. So that's my connection to the work.
Lacey couldn't make it today. Fran, are you able to say hello?
I'm suffering from a really bad migraine, everybody. Sorry for the sunglasses. So my name is Fran Warren. I'm an ex-Intel manager from many years back, but I've spent 25 years volunteering full-time for Washington County, significant natural resource policy 869, as well as transportation around the county, especially around the Cooper Mountain high growth areas. I'm a member of the CPO organization, the state SIAC citizen committees, and lots of other ground truthing stuff, including a lot of GIS mapping around Washington County.
Great. Thanks, Fran. Hope you feel better soon. Deborah.
Oh. Deborah, you're on mute.
There you
All
go.
right. Sorry, I'll start over. First, I apologize for having a cold. I'm currently chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. I've been on the commission. I'm in my 7th year now, my 2nd term. And my background is actually in teaching, but I got involved in land use issues when issues came up around my neighborhood. And I feel they're vital and important and really interesting. And I'm really thrilled that there's so much expert knowledge on this team. I'm looking forward to learning from all of you.
Thanks, Deborah.
My name's Morgan Will, and I'm a planning commissioner for Washington County. And my background is a land use planning consultant and a real estate development project manager. And I've worked with nonprofits in habitat restoration in my younger days.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Wellner. I think I'm here on behalf of Home Builders Association, but I've got a pretty well-rounded background of county development knowledge. I sat on the Washington County Planning Commission for a decade. Currently sit on the Clean Water Services Advisory Commission. Have done a lot of development work in Washington County, including in 422 areas over the past 20 years. And I'm looking forward to the conversation here.
Thanks. Is Ted here? I didn't see if he had come in to the meeting. Okay. There are some members of the public in attendance today. We are going to have an opportunity to ask questions toward the end of the meeting, and by raising your hands at that time, if possible. So feel free to listen in, and then we'll be able to address your comments at the end of the meeting. So appreciate that. Thank you. So I also see that there are a couple more members of our Washington County team here. Erin, do you want to pop in and say hello?
Hello, I'm Erin Wardell. I'm the Planning and Development Services Manager, and this is a really important high priority project for our department. So I'm just here to listen. Thanks, Michelle.
And we also have Brenda Schaefer.
Hi, everyone. Likewise, I'm here to listen. I'm part of the Land Use and Transportation Communications team assigned to assist the planning folks with their various projects.
So with that, I will turn it over to Kathy to get into the substantive issues of our meeting today.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Actually, before I do that, just quickly, Joy, were you able to get your microphone back on?
That's
there we go. Can you guys hear me now?
We can.
Oh, good. Okay. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. I'm Joy Vaughn. I am with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in the Habitat Division in Salem, and I'm the statewide land use coordinator. And then there is also Ariana, who I'm not sure if she joined.
Oh, Ariana.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that she was trying to join in.
Okay.
She is our district regional habitat biologist. So we're both on this call, and hopefully she's back on now. So yeah, thank you.
I think
there we go.
Yeah. Ariana, are you able to say hello? Or
hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think I wasn't promoted to panelist, so I couldn't say anything. My name is Ariana Scioni, and I am the habitat biologist for the North Willamette watershed, and looking forward to working with all of you.
Oh, thanks, Ariana. Sorry about that. I just saw your first name and I wasn't putting your full name together for the panelists. I apologize for that.
No worries.
All right, great.
Well, I'm going to just say very, very few words about the Technical Advisory Committee roles and responsibilities and kind of the decision-making process, and then touch on the agenda. We are actually already behind schedule, so I'm going to go at a quick pace, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions if there are any. You probably saw in your packet that there were some roles and responsibilities identified. Again, we're expecting to have 4 of these TAC meetings. We hope that you can attend all of them. Of course, we realize that's not always possible, busy schedules being what they are. If you can send an alternate, great. If you can let us know ahead of time, either if you're not going to be able to attend at all, or if you're able to send an alternate, just so again, we know to make sure to promote that person to the panel and so forth. And again, our goal is to have the TAC packet out at least a week in advance. I realized this last time we were a day off of that, but our goal is to do better and at least give you a full week. And then if you, during the meeting, I mean, unless it's, you can't hear me, there's some problem with the visual, something's gone wrong, we'll save questions till we get to, and we'll be pausing regularly to take questions. Oh, I do see Fran's got their hand up. Fran, did you have a question?
Yes, I don't know if it's my resources or yours, but your microphone seems to be breaking up a bit for me. So if someone could someone could put the closed captioning back on again, then at least I can follow a little better.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. I've been having some microphone issues. Is it better if I've just moved closer and I'm speaking more loudly? How is that? Is it better? Can you hear me?
It's better, but I think that to assure complete concept, it would be good to put the closed captions on for me at least.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, and is everybody else able to hear me okay? So, okay, darn it. All right. It's a new laptop for me, and I think I'm going to need a headset with a better microphone. So let me just make an adjustment here to try and get that closer, and I will try and speak up. And again, just let me know if you can't hear me. That's the perfect kind of question to interrupt for, absolutely. And so, also, just a reminder that our meetings are going to be recorded. So, next slide, please. Again, the decision-making process, the technical advisors are going to be providing feedback to county staff as our community members and stakeholders through a variety of outreach forums, and we'll be talking about that later. That's all going to lead to options and recommendations for the Planning Commission. There's another, of course, opportunity as the Planning Commission's considering that for community and additional community and stakeholder input, both to the Planning Commission and to the board. So next slide, please. Again, already falling behind, but we've got a pretty quick agenda. So it's a welcome, we've done that. We'll be moving on to the project background. I will try, it's going to be very high level, but I will go over a little bit about the project purpose and background, and then hand it to Ethan, who will be talking about the inventory, the methodology preliminary approach. We've got 60 minutes there. Again, we've got questions for you, specific questions for you there. 10 minutes for public comment, and then just a few minutes for closing and wrap up. And our goal is definitely to get you out of here on time. So thank you. We'll keep moving. Well, actually, pause here. Questions? Other questions? Anything on that section? All right, we'll keep moving. Great. Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, project background, purpose, and overview. Next slide. So again, let me just catch up here. Sorry. Need to see my notes. So since the 1970s, the foundation of the statewide planning program for land use in Oregon has been the 19 statewide planning goals. And many of you are probably familiar with that. So I'm not going to talk about the other goals. In particular, we're interested in statewide planning goal 5. It requires local governments to identify and protect significant natural resources. It also addresses other things like scenic and historic areas. We're not going to be talking about those. We're focused on natural resources only. The procedures and requirements for complying with Goal 5 are in the Oregon Administrative Rules, or OARs. Complicating things somewhat in our circumstance is that the OAR for Goal 5 was updated after Washington completed its program. So its program was acknowledged originally in 1984, and after that followed OAR 660-16 or Division 16. The current rule is Division 23. So when we're going to be talking, as I go forward in this presentation, about the rule, we're going to be talking about Division 23. Next slide, please. Division 23 requires that jurisdictions apply the requirements of the functional plan for regional resources rather than the standard Goal 5 procedures in Division 23. And for us, that means we're going to be looking at the Metro Urban Growth Management Plan, that's a mouthful, Metro Urban Growth Management Functional, Metro's Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, excuse me, Title 13, and that's going to apply to riparian corridors and wildlife habitat categories. So in Goal 5, there are different categories of resources. The functional plan Title 13 applies to riparian corridors and wildlife habitat categories. So next slide. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty on my side. So the county's current comprehensive framework plan for urban areas and the community plan policies and maps inventory. There's 11 community plans, and those plans include specific requirements for resources and also inventory those resources. And in addition, the Community Development Code, Section 422, applies to what I would call a somewhat overlapping set of natural resource designations. And those are listed on the slide. They include things like water areas and wetlands, and then water areas, wetlands, and fish and wildlife habitat, and then also wildlife habitat. And then as well, the Metro regionally significant fish and wildlife habitat. So that's picking up riparian habitat class 1 and riparian habitat class 2. And but those regulations in the CDC, that section 422, those are the ones that currently protect, preserve, and require protection or mitigation to significant natural resources on that list. Next slide. So, and again, kind of the policy framework that we're working within, we've got, as I mentioned, we've got Goal 5 and Goal 5 rule. We've got Title 13 and the Title 13 requirements. We also have a legal challenge that the county is facing, and many of you may be familiar with this as well. But it's another factor that we're going to be kind of working within. And that is that there's been a petition filed with the LCD, or excuse me, with LCDC, stating that some of the regulations were not clear and objective, and therefore the county is out of compliance with state law. The requirements are that these regulations be clear and objective, and so there's been an enforcement order and a stay issued. Now, this applies to residential projects that would impact areas mapped as wildlife habitat. So it doesn't impact non-residential projects or projects where the development has already occurred and mitigation has been approved. At least that's my understanding, and I'll let county staff jump in if I've said that wrong. And then the stay is going to be in place until the new regulations become effective. And so this is one of the reasons that, you know, we're thinking about the timeline. We'll talk about the schedule. But the new regulations we're hoping, counting on being adopted by August 1st, 2024. So, there we go. We've been describing this project as a limited update, and that is because it's intended to build on existing inventories and available maps. And the inventory process, and Ethan will be going into a great deal more detail about that, but it's going to build on available data, including mapped sites that were identified on the current county and metro inventories within urban areas outside of cities. And so you'll hear us sometimes refer to that as the county's urban unincorporated area, or UUA. And the other reason I think that we're thinking of this as limited is that it's generally intended to be consistent with the county's current Goal 5 decisions and policy direction. So the county's current comprehensive plans provides clear direction, specifically, especially for water-related habitat that would be like wetlands, streams, riparian. And that's consistent with the functional plan regional requirements. And the board has endorsed that level of protection for these water-related resources. For wildlife habitat, for kind of what we oftentimes call upland resources or non-riparian resources or non-water related, there's lots of ways to talk about those resources, but they're kind of the other that isn't in the, directly related to the stream corridor or wetland. Those, I think, are the ones where we think that most of the work is needed. And so we're going to be looking at new, clear, and objective implementing measures in particular, consistent with past practice and earlier land use decisions, but again, kind of really taking a closer look at those, the inventory and, the approach and so forth. So I think our thinking is it's limited both because we're starting place, but also kind of the scope of what's being revisited to a certain extent. Okay, next slide. This is a whirlwind tour of the Goal 5 process. So as I mentioned, for some resources, we're following Title 13. But if we do things that are over and above Title 13 or involve resources that aren't, following that exact Title 13 process, we're then going to fall back to the standard Goal 5 process under Division 23. And so that process is starting with the inventory, and the inventory includes collecting information, assessing the quality of that information, and then making a determination of significance. That's where we are. We're taking the first two bullets of that inventory process, and again, I'll be talking about this more. Our assumption, our hope is that we can take those two as givens, because a lot of work's gone into identifying those resources, mapping those resources, assessing the quality of those resources. But some things have changed that might alter whether they are still significant. Lots happened in the 20 years plus since those have been inventoried. And so that's where we'd like to begin. That's where we see this process. And that's a big part of our conversation today. And then having identified significant resources for the universe of resources that have been determined to be significant, we do an analysis of the ESEE, or economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences of allowing, limiting, or prohibiting conflicting uses within significant resource areas and impact areas. And so a conflicting use is a land use or an activity that's typically subject to land use regulations and that could adversely impact a Goal 5 resource. From there, based on the results of the ESEE, and it is a exercise in balancing and considering trade-offs. So areas that might have high environmental value maybe would get different results than areas that have a lower environmental value based on their relative economic or zoning. They're kind of those. So you're balancing those factors in the ESEE. The results of that leads to policies and land use regulations. So, again, we're hoping to rely on some of the good work that's been done previously. So ESEEs have been done, especially for significant water-related habitat. Metro did an ESEE for Title 13. We'd like to be able to rely on the work that's been done there. And for some of the urban growth areas, cities have already completed that evaluation. And so we think looking for your input on this, but we'd like to be able to rely on a lot of the existing work that's been done. And then that leaves us, I think, with an ESEE that's focused primarily on significant non-water related wildlife habitat, or I'm just going to say upland habitat for the shorthand. So with that, next slide. So our scope of work is, you can see it really mirrors the standard Goal 5 process. So, other than obviously phase 1 project initiation, phase 2 is the inventory, phase 3 is going to be the ESEE, and phase 4 is the Goal 5 program decision recommendations, and includes the code concepts all the way to, draft regulations. Now those overlap. So, we are starting to think about what goes into the ESE and ESE methodology in advance of finishing the inventory so that we can be ready to go. So these are not absolutely sequential, but there is overlap, but this is the general flow of the information. Next slide. So this is a very high level of schedule. And so it shows, where we are and also where we hope to have the TAC meetings. So here we are with our initial TAC meeting happening. And then at TAC meeting number 2, we'll be talking about the draft inventory and ESE methodology. So that today we're talking about the inventory methodology, the results of that, applying that methodology and producing an inventory, a draft inventory and a report. That'll be the conversation at the next meeting. And again, the ESE methodology. At 3, we hope to have some public engagement results. So we'll be reaching out to the community. There's talking about the public engagement plan in a minute, but we'll have some input to share with you, what we've heard, and hopefully the draft ESE and some code concepts at that point. And then 4, wrapping up with draft plan and code amendments for your input and consideration. That's our goal for those 4 meetings. It's a lot to cover. Next slide. As I mentioned, there's a public engagement plan. While the public's, of course, we're more than welcome to attend these TAC meetings, these are not our primary means of public engagement. This is just, again, focused on kind of a technical review. We've got a plan. It outlines a number of different opportunities that are envisioned for the project as we go forward. Our goal is to reach out to lots of different groups, try and get lots of input, be at lots of different places sharing this information, taking steps to, advance racial equity and ensure the approach to updating this program is inclusive. And that means, reaching out and to diverse and historically marginalized community members to participate. And, obviously throughout, we want to be communicating accurate, understandable, timely information. But really, again, we're going to have a small amount of public engagement opportunity during this meeting, but it isn't our primary opportunity. But we do hope to have lots and lots of public engagement in the project. And with that, next slide. Just a quick, you don't need to try and read this. I realize it's probably too small, but just it's identifying some of the tools that we'll be using as we proceed through the project. And so we're going to be holding online open houses. Staff's going to be attending community events. So a wide range of tools are going to be in use throughout the project, and different tools in different phases, obviously, as appropriate. There's a, next slide, please. There's a, you may have already seen this. There's a link to the public engagement plan on the project webpage, and you'll also find links to the materials for these TAC meetings and other information about the project and so forth. So I encourage you, if you haven't been there already, to check that out. Okay. And with that, I'm going to pause for questions, because that was a whirlwind tour of a lot of information. Okay, I see a question from Deborah.
Thanks. On slide 17, you gave an overview of the whole project. And inventory was your, would you go back to 17? Right. No, sorry, 7. You're on 6.
There we go. Thanks, Brandon.
Oh, thank you. That's the one. Inventory is the second one, and the second TAC meeting will be, you'll have a draft inventory for us. I believe that's what it says on slide 18.
That's correct. That's we're hoping.
Okay, so my question is, what is the inventory process?
So great question. So the inventory methodology, which is our conversation, that is the bulk of this meeting, is a discussion about how that inventory is going to come together. And so what we're hoping is that we're going to have a conversation about the methodology that we're planning to use. And it's a GIS-based methodology with, a limited amount of corrections and so forth based on that. It's not an extensive field methodology. So we'll talk about that methodology, talk about how that's going to be run and what that might look like. And then based on all the input that we've received and everything, if we don't have major changes to that, we'll basically, Ethan and his team will run that method, the GIS folks will run that methodology, produce a draft of the inventory based on the methodology. So at the next meeting, we would hope to have the results of the methodology as it actually delivers maps of the inventory. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. If it's okay, I'd like to ask another question, unless someone else has a question.
I think it's fine.
I'm wondering if the public input, it seems like the public input should affect the inventory process. It's just a question I have in floating generally. Is the inventory going to be set before the public responds?
Great question. Absolutely not. No. In fact, public input's been ongoing. I think Michelle could talk a little bit about some of the outreach that's already happening. And then in addition, it will be a draft inventory until it's adopted. So opportunities for people to comment on it. I think for the general public, it's easier to react to maps, maybe than I think the rather esoteric conversation that we're going to have today around the methodology. So while people may have some thoughts about the methodology, and I'm more than welcome to provide those comments, it's, I think, from a public engagement perspective, talking about GIS layers is not always something that people necessarily relate to.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But it will remain a draft. Michelle, did you want to jump in on that?
Well, we're kind of early on in the process, Deborah, and the methodology, this is kind of how we're going to conduct the inventory. We have had a little bit of direction like that it is a limited inventory, meaning we're looking at what we already have existing kind of from the first inventory that we did in the 1980s combined with Metro's inventory. And so we're limited in what we look at in that regard. But there are critical pieces that we'll talk about in a little bit about how we decide what's significant within those inventories.
Thanks.
Are there other questions about, I know I went over that really rapidly. In fact, I'm curious, maybe just a quick show of hands. Is the Goal 5 Title 13 process generally familiar to most of you? I mean, does anybody does anybody need more information on that? Because we could point you in the direction of some resources. I'm thinking all of you are at least familiar with that process, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess if anybody isn't and feels like they need more information, please do reach out to us. There's a lot of information out there, and one could spend weeks talking about the details. So and how it all comes together. But okay, with that, we're I think back on time, so I'm happy about that. I'm going to hand it over to Ethan. Ethan. got a lot to cover.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Hello, everyone. So I'm gonna give a overview, and actually, let me ask the question of, am I controlling the slides or is Brandon controlling the slides?
I can give you control. Actually, I think Michelle has to give you control. So I'll
okay. Oh gosh, now you're asking me to do something tough here. I think you have the ability to, Ethan, now that Brandon has released control for you to share your screen if you have the PowerPoint up, that you can do that.
I don't have the latest one. So you know what, you can just you can put it back up. I'll just ask you to flip from slide to slide. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, next slide. So yeah, I'm going to go over the inventory methodology at a fairly high level. We've had a good bit of back and forth and conversations internally. You know, it's still draft and kind of coming together. So the inventory starting point, as Kathy mentioned, we're starting with the county's inventory mapping, their significant natural resources, their water-related habitats. Those are the first two bullet points there. And then their wildlife habitat. And then also with Metro's inventory, which also has riparian habitat classes and upland habitat classes. The reason why you see the upland habitat classes for Metro kind of in a different color there is just to recognize that current county code kind of, you know, obviously they cover their own resources, but they also make reference to the riparian habitats. But the upland habitats will be new, kind of bringing that in where there weren't regulations before. And I'll say that I'm the ecologist on the project, so I look to the land use folks to correct me when I'm misstating land use policy type things. And they do that a lot, which I appreciate. Okay.
And also, just one little point about that is that the Metro inventory, of course, is within the Metro regional area. So although the county has significant natural resources that are outside the urban growth boundary, the Metro inventory is really kind of limited to within the urban growth boundary or near the urban growth boundary. So that's kind of the project's study area limitations.
Yeah. Can you move to the next slide? There we go. All right, so the steps were basic overview of the steps for the inventory include one, defining the study area. And we're going to go into examples for each of these and show you some maps so you can get a feel for things. And we'll also have a few stopping points for questions as we go along. And highlighting some of the questions that we posed to all of you in the meeting materials that Michelle had sent out. So first, let's make sure we're defining the study area. Next, we're going to take the county and Metro mapping and we're going to consolidate that mapping. There's a lot of overlap. There's some discrepancies. There's similarities. So that, you know, we're working through that. And I'll provide some examples. Next, we want to remove areas that have been developed since the county did their mapping and since Metro did their mapping. It's been several decades since that mapping was done. And so we want to acknowledge that some areas are no longer habitat, they're homes now. And then the fourth item will be testing for significance. To a large extent, you know, we know that previous work has had its own, most of the previous work had its own significance review. Maybe a caveat on the uplands habitats, especially Metros. But we'll talk a little bit about that and kind of what we're thinking about that. And then the last item is that, you know, recognizing that the local municipalities have been working on their own community plans for areas that are in the process or will be eventually annexed into their jurisdiction, but are still currently in county jurisdiction. And so if that work is far enough along, we would incorporate that, or may incorporate that into this Goal 5 update for the county. And we'll talk more about some of those issues. Next step, next slide, please. So here's this study area for the, there also, you can see the different coloration there. That's the different county community plan areas. So when we do a report, we might kind of acknowledge these different areas. There are two areas that kind of extend outside of that reddish boundary that the county has recently already done an update. So that was North Bethany and Bonnie Slope. So we're not going to be including those areas. And something to note about the study area, you can see there's a few large blocks that are all, large blocks, but then there are many scattered portions of the study area. It covers a really wide geographic area. Again, this is the unincorporated urban area within Washington County. And so what this kind of gets at is this idea of the importance of using GIS to do this analysis. And with that, trying to limit the amount of kind of manual fixes we might do by zooming in and tweaking things. We're really trying to, as much as possible, come up with some standard rules where we can use existing data layers from the county, Metro, including Metro's ARLIS GIS database to kind of adjust things. All right, next slide. So here's just an example of the county's mapping on the left, and Metro's mapping on the right. And you can see, I don't know, can folks see my cursor if I'm moving around? Probably not, because I'm not taking control. Anyway, you can see some of the drainages look quite similar, but there are also some differences. You can see that some of the drainages on Metro, where it's showing up in blue for riparian habitat, has been mapped as wildlife habitat by the county. So these are just kind of a quick picture of some of the differences. And the next slide also will show this as well. And so this next slide, which is showing the various differences. I'm just fixing my screen here, so I feel like it's getting cut off for me. So this slide here, I'm going to carry through a lot part of the rest of the discussion on methods, and you'll see different things changing based on how we're applying some of our proposed rules for adjusting things. But again, you can see the county mapping. If you look at the water-related fish and wildlife habitat, which is following the streams, I don't recall exactly what buffer the county used, but you can see it's a fairly limited buffer around that stream. If you compare that to Metro's mapping, again, the blue, two different shades of blue, depending on the class of the riparian area, the quality of the habitat. You can see Metro's covers a lot wider area along these stream corridors. And that is generally speaking because they've accounted for steep slopes in these areas. And it's very similar, the rule set for dealing with these steep slopes is very similar to what Clean Water Services uses in their vegetated corridor mapping. And then of course, you can see some differences in the wildlife habitat, where in the dark green on the county's mapping versus the upland habitat mapped by Metro. And so there's just, you can see those differences. I guess we'll jump to the next slide. So kind of going into the next step, just talking about how we're going to do some of the consolidation. We kind of have some rules for riparian habitat and then some rules for upland habitat. So this is just generally saying that, on the left, you can see we've got Metro's habitat class 1 and 2. We also have the county's water areas and wetlands, and county water areas and wetlands and fish and wildlife habitat. And the result, what we're looking to carry forward, is basically say that after we've reviewed the GIS layers, trying to truth it with aerial photos, it seemed very clear that Metro's mapping is more accurate, it's more up to date. County mapping was done, I believe, prior to modern GIS technology, whereas Metros use GIS technology. It's also not as old as the counties. And so it also, when you look at some of the stream networks, it seems to follow the same stream network that Clean Water Services uses in their GIS data. So it's just a more modern data set. And so that's what we're looking to basically just carry those class 1 and 2 riparian areas over from Metro and say that will be the county's new riparian habitat. And then also the names of the habitat types or Goal 5 resources, we're looking to go from these long, lengthy names of water areas and wetlands and fish and wildlife, and just refer to it as riparian habitat. Next slide. And so here's just kind of a result. Again, the two smaller maps are from the previous slide, just showing the contrast between county versus Metro. And then the result, the larger map, is showing what we would carry forward, which is essentially the same exact thing as Metro's mapping, as you see in the inset. Okay, next slide. So now, as far as consolidating, the upland habitat work, I forgot to mention what I'm talking about through here in the information that was provided to you before the meeting. There's a table that gives some, that kind of talks through the same description of where this is going. So I'm just presenting it in a slightly different format. So here for uplands, we're starting with Metro's upland habitat class A and B, and the county's wildlife habitat, not including that which overlaps with Metro's riparian habitat. So I guess I would say, going back to what we're showing previously, any county wildlife habitat that overlapped with Metro's riparian habitat mapping, we're pulling into the riparian mapping category. So anyway, from our starting point with the Metro upland habitat and the county wildlife habitat, what we're looking at right now is taking the overlap of county and Metro upland habitats. We're going to keep that, and we're also going to keep county habitat that did not overlap with Metro habitat. And we'll show you what that looks like in the next slide. Again, just an example. Lots of colors going on here. Again, the first two smaller photo screenshots there are just what you've previously seen, showing the starting points. And what we're showing in this larger map here, and I apologize because if you look at the legend for the larger map where it says Title 13 Upland and Riparian Habitat, that should actually say overlap between county and Metro upland habitats. So the dark and pale green shading, that is the overlap between Metro and the county, and that we would keep. The bright green, that is county wildlife habitat that doesn't overlap with Metro, that we would keep. And then the pink was not previously noted in that previous slide as saying that we would keep it, but this is something we still need to kind of wrap our heads around, and we're still talking through. The pink is Metro A and B habitat that does not overlap with the county's habitat mapping. And so in some places that looks like it probably would be fine to eliminate, but in the bottom corner there, where we get into Cooper Mountain Nature Park, that's all pink. And so that's we have to take a closer look at this. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, so we'll take a quick break here. We're going to dive into the next stages, and we'll, the next few slides we'll talk about dealing with developed areas and significance. But before we get there, we just wanted a quick check-in with folks, see if you have any questions and if you have any feedback regarding these questions. So first question is, do you agree with the general approach to the inventory? Do you have any specific questions or comments? I guess we'll focus on that first. And
it looks like we've already got a couple of hands up, and I think it was Bruce first, followed by Matt, followed by Fran. So
yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I don't have an opinion yet, but I guess I'd like to better understand the inventory process. Even on the map that you showed in the previous section, there were habitat areas that were classified as homes, or homes were classified as habitat, and a little vice versa. I'm just curious how, I recognize you don't want to go through inch by inch, but like, what's the general process for saying, yeah, this is pretty accurate? And conversely, when there is good habitat that's absent, how does that get registered?
Yeah, good question. In the next slide, I'll be going into kind of our initial take at kind of a GIS-based approach for how we're going to remove developed areas. And I think the other part of your question had to do with what if there are areas that weren't previously mapped by Metro or the county? How do we deal with that? And the direction that I've received, my understanding is that we're not looking to expand beyond those areas, previous mapping. But that's, for input from folks to share with us, to let us know if you think that, we know there are these other areas that are super important that need to be included. There is, when we get to significance, we've limited that to those areas that have been previously mapped, but we do include, or there's a question about like parks, and how to include those, whether it's the entire park or just the part that's mapped as habitat, or and we'll go into that a little bit more. Does that, at least preliminary, get to your question?
Yeah, I think I'm getting the gist of it. Again, I don't think this is the time for great discussion, but I think not mapping some of the areas that are habitat that were missed doesn't represent community values as my stakeholders would see it.
Okay. Thank you. Was Matt next?
Matt next, and then Fran. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Ethan. I have a couple of questions. Did I hear you right that Bonnie Slope and Bethany are not going to be part of this limited re-inventory?
Yes. My understanding from the county is that those areas relatively recently just did their own new updates. And so that's why they're not being included.
Okay. So, and I know we're trying to go through the inventory process before we talk about the rules and regulations, but it's hard to do that. And I know I know I'm bringing it up on the first meeting, but there's only 4 meetings.
Yeah.
So the first piece is for the riparian. It would be very helpful for me to see a map relative to what Clean Water Services buffers would be, because that might answer a lot of questions for me. And because I think that they're probably going to be relatively similar. But if you guys can, I mean, I don't know, I assume that the district has estimated VC in a GIS form that we could just import into a map. Damon, anyone?
So we don't have that district-wide, because what we have folks do as they come in to develop a property, that's when they do their natural resource assessment, look to see what's there and set that veg corridor limit. We've never gone through a process similar to this where we go out and try to inventory those things ahead of time, with the exception of a few planning areas, Bonnie Slope being an example. But we don't have that as a district wide to make a comparison. I think if there was some interest in doing that, we could maybe select some representative type locations and try to do a comparison of what we believe the buffers might be for a site compared to the inventory.
So then go ahead, Ethan. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask Damon, do you guys have some type of pre-screening map for applicants to look at, or is that?
There may be a pre-screening map out there, and Lindsay, you may know the latest on what the public can see. But that pre-screening map is very limited in its accuracy and exaggerated for the purposes of ensuring that we get reviews done. It was created for reviewers initially that maybe didn't have a lot of experience, just to have a quick pre-screen to say, is there something nearby and do we have to look closer? It was not an inventory.
Okay.
So then that takes me back to, I guess, the first part of this is I know we're trying to separate the inventory from the rules and requirements, but it would be helpful to know what the process is going to be. If you've got one of these mapped areas on your property and you go have your biologist go out and do a wetland delineation, is that going to determine what the edge of the resource is, or is this map that is not informed by a site visit going to determine that? And are those areas where there are contradictions going to be any more regulated than they are today?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab, and then maybe Kathy or Michelle can jump in. My general sense is that the county's looking to go in the direction of your ground truth, wetland delineation, and then whatever buffers or vegetated corridors CWS would require based on their guidance, that would be acceptable by the county. So you're not having different boundaries that are different by 5 feet or something, or, something like that, as far as the riparian stuff goes.
Yeah, I think Michelle wanted to hop in on that as well. Michelle, were you hoping to say something?
Well, yeah, I think that's close, Ethan, to what I think what we have envisioned for this. And I would also remind folks that the inventory process, as what's required by Division 23, is identifying the site. So that kind of precise location isn't necessarily what is the actual what's on the ground. And there's an opportunity through various case law and regulations to identify the precise locations through the process. And we've had that in the past, and that will likely continue in the future, and continue with Clean Water Services requirements as they have been in the past. And we're bound by Title 13, and Title 13 lets us use Clean Water Services requirements as a proxy. So kind of foresee that continuing in the future. So if we don't get the boundaries quite right through the inventory, we kind of identifying the general vicinity at a high level of where those are. And so when you come in for development, would control, because that's obviously more accurate.
Okay, thank you.
I think it was Fran, and then it looks like Amanda has their hand up.
Yeah, Fran.
Yeah. First of all, I am so excited about this program to synchronize and the Metro mappings with the Washington County mappings once and for all, and bring them up to date. And since I'm on the regional corridors and connectivity group there, that helps with this regional thing. And I just wanted to ask or offer, we could do it offline, but Samara Group is one group that does mappings, as well as we just got ODF to subscribe to tree plotter Canopy, which is an AI-based GIS system, which could also, it comes down to the census levels, even to the tax lot level. So we could add those to your toolkit if you need them. So I'm just saying, offering myself as a repository here. I do a lot of networking with tools that are around, and I see a lot of gaps and overlaps. So I'm excited that you're putting all of these into a single place for all of us to use the same criteria. And if I can help in any way, please do let me know.
Yeah, Fran, that sounds really intriguing. And I could see potentially asking if you can demo that software, or, you know, kind of show us what it can do. And then that might inform some of our methodology if it seems ready for prime time, you know, with the schedule we have. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to expand scope. I'm just trying to figure out more tool sets to put into the toolkit to facilitate your objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Amanda.
I just wanted to make sure that the response to the question about the on-site assessment versus the mapping was specific to wildlife habitat, because riparian areas are going to be as mapped if you're using the Metro maps. And is that what you're thinking?
That's a problem. That would be a problem.
Yeah, my understanding was that that the question was actually related to the riparian habitat, and that, you know, I think we're seeing that what comes out of our work, which for riparian will essentially be what Metro has already mapped, that's used as kind of a screening tool by the county when an applicant comes in and saying, hey, you need to now do a site assessment because we show something on your property. And then when they do that site assessment, that's the ground truth reality that we work with. And that ground truthing is being done based on, you know, for wetlands, based on DSL guidelines, for buffers, vegetated corridors / riparian areas, is being done in accordance with CWS criteria.
Right, and Clean Water Services is responsible for water, clearly, and riparian areas and wetlands and habitat, you know, do more than just protect water quality. So I just think more discussion is needed as to, you know, particularly for a riparian area, you know, the Metro starts with their Title III, which, depending on the size of the watershed, but the larger watersheds, I think over 50 acres is 50 feet and then can extend up to 200 feet, depending if there's slope. And then if that also is found or identified as has wildlife habitat, then that is that. And then if there's other habitat that is adjacent to the riparian area, then that, I understand, is a area that would be adjustable by an on-site assessment of whether the habitat functions are being provided. But as far as areas that are reserved for riparian areas with minimal development, that approach to adjusting is different or based on different triggers or criteria than would be for wildlife habitat.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think in the interest of time, because there are more slides that talk about the determination of significance, I think what I'm hearing, though, and we have one more question from Ted at this break, and then we have another break for more questions. But I think what we need to think about in that first draft of the inventory report is a section that talks about the relationship between Clean Water Services, vegetated corridors, and the riparian areas, and really kind of talks through that overlap and how that, not to say what the regulations will ultimately do or not do, but just to talk about that overlap and the relationship between those two. And I think that maybe is something that I'm hearing there's questions about how that's going to come together. So I think Ethan, you probably are as well, and maybe we can think about how we address that and be ready to talk about that more in detail at the next meeting. Does that sound
that sounds good. And I think from what I recall, and I might be off by this, but I feel like in Metro had their model ordinance, and I feel like in that it spelled out the buffer distances or riparian widths. And I feel like that math is the same as what CWS uses for their vegetated corridor. So although we call things different things, functionally on the ground, it results in a similar effect. But that said, we'll look at those things and see where's the match or lack of a match.
Yeah. And I think that we can accomplish that again. And like, let us bring back more information and have a kind of a more specific conversation about that. I think we have questions, looks like from Ted, Matt, and Damon. And then I think we should move on because we will have more information from Ethan on the rest of the inventory process and then more questions. So.
All right, thank you so much. I apologize, I was a little late to join this call. And I think I understand the general concept, and I like what you're proposing, updating the maps using the Metro Title 13 maps that were originally developed. And I think it's a good approach to use it as a screening tool to determine if there's a, like a trigger for some kind of on-site additional review. The one thing I would just point out is that, although the Metro maps are kind of a more recent inventory, they are still, like over 15 years old. And there have been new data sets developed that could be useful and help with developing this screening tool. Again, not to create obligations or define the rules around what happens where, but as a screening tool. And I think Chief, in my mind, is a data set that was developed a few years ago in partnership with Metro and the Urban Green Spaces Institute. And it's available through the website Oak Prairie Working Group. And I did provide that data information about where to find that data to in prior comments on the significant natural resources update. And I would love to see the county and its consultants utilize that data as part of developing this screening tool. And just as a way to kind of, further strengthen the data set and its comprehensiveness. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
I think it's Matt and then Damon. Is that right?
Sure. I'm talking about the CWS vegetated corridor and the Goal 5 or the resource within that corridor as one and the same as riparian corridor. And so I just want to, if they are in fact being treated the same, I'm not going to have any heartburn over that, but I want to make sure that we're not losing any flexibility. I mean, the same goes for with Clean Water Services, we have some opportunities to do buffer averaging where that if we have a 50-foot buffer from the edge of a resource, we can move it a very small amount so long as we provide for more buffer somewhere else. I'm hopeful that through this process, we're not going to create another layer of regulation that would take away that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, I believe that's the goal of the county is similar, but let Michelle maybe.
And Damon, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on Amanda's comments again a little bit and make sure I have a clear understanding too, because I'm certainly not an expert on Title III or Title 13. But what I'm understanding is that there had been a model ordinance for Title III. CWS's vegetated corridor riparian buffer limits were set based on that, but that was geared toward waters. And the adjusting those are more about the water than the wildlife. And under Title 13, adjusting those riparian areas are more wildlife centric in the decision. Is that correct, Amanda?
Yeah, I think that's part of what I'm getting at, Damien. And I'll have to say that, moving from the Goal 5 rule to Titles 3 and 13 to Clean Water Services implementation of all or parts of that package, I get lost. So as part of this process, I think it'll be helpful to track better, because I agree with what you said, that you're looking at riparian areas for one purpose and the wildlife habitat would be for a different purpose that isn't your job, right? And so there might need to be two different approaches to how to implement those different layers.
I think one of the problems is within Title 13, there are several options counties and jurisdictions can follow. And one of those options is to use the model code ordinance, which a lot of jurisdictions do. But jurisdictions in Washington County use the Tualatin Basin decision, or B5 option, which is follow Clean Water Services requirements, along with some other recommendations back in 2000. And so the county is compliant with that piece of it, not necessarily the model ordinance, although the model ordinance contains a lot of the elements that are within the Clean Water Services regulations. So it gets a bit circular, and we're likely to not overload or go beyond the Clean Water Services requirements because we want to stay compliant with Title 13 and not get out of that lane of complying with that particular section for the riparian habitat. But it does get totally confusing.
I would add that, the functional effect of the two different things, between what Clean Water Services does versus, calling it, focusing on water quality versus habitat. In the end, Clean Water Services says you need to plant this up with native vegetation, and you need to have high % cover of trees and canopy cover. It's the same thing we'd be asking from a wildlife perspective, so if we can slim down the paperwork, I think that would be beneficial to all, but I don't know. Anyway.
So Ethan, I think we have some time left to finish up because there is an interesting discussion of the determination of significance, which is that next step. Then maybe answer those questions. And then I want to make sure we reserve our time for public comment on schedule. So.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
So I guess we'll move on. Next slide. All right, so here we're talking about removing developed areas, and we've been looking, trying to find an efficient way to go about this using GIS, existing data, and Metro has a developed lands layer, and we looked at using that, and in some places it seemed like, hey, this would be great, and then we scroll over to another location and we're like, we couldn't quite make sense of it. It seemed like there were areas that maybe had gone through a development review perhaps, and it got called out as developed, but there's very clearly it's showing developed right over what is clearly an undeveloped riparian corridor. So we decided to let go of that and kind of create our own sort of version of that, these screening layers. And our initial thoughts, based on looking at how things were playing out, we came up with two different ones, one for riparian habitat and one for upland wildlife habitat. And basically, so for riparian habitat, we will look at parcels of, here it says of less than X square feet. For this example, we're using 10,000 square feet, a 10,000 square foot lot that has at least one structure mapped on it by as showing up in ARLIS. And then for uplands, we used a larger area that was a ½ acre with one structure. And I realize this map is a little bit confusing because we're showing both the riparian and the upland screening areas. But generally speaking, it's showing, the colors that you see showing that don't have that gray shading over the top would remain. There is one area in particular that after I put the slide together, I realized it makes it appear, sorry, pardon my face coming towards the screen. I'm just trying to read the street name. By 181st Avenue at that kink of that, where the riparian corridor narrows down, and we show it that it's developed. But in actuality, at that location, when we're just applying the riparian screening layer, it would not screen that out. So that corridor would remain. But generally speaking, the rest of it is relatively accurate. And so that's what, this level of screening would do to kind of pull out those developed areas. If we go to the next slide, please. And so now we've removed the developed areas as best we can using the approach from the previous slide. And now we're looking, testing for patch size. That's sort of what we're looking at in terms of thinking of significance. And in this case, we're saying, we're basically saying everything that was previously done that isn't developed is significant unless it's below a certain habitat patch size. And at this point, we decided to just focus on that removal of small patches as it relates to wildlife habitat, upland wildlife habitat, as opposed to the riparian habitat. Part of the thinking on the riparian habitat is that we know it's going to get that review by what was conversation we just had with Clean Water Services. Also, there can be smaller wetlands that have, that still have a buffer around them. And so we didn't want to, go there with the riparian habitat. But for upland wildlife habitat, if there are little pockets, and here I circled some in red that are showing up as not developed, but still remaining, those bright green areas, and those would go away. So Metro used, in their mapping, used a 2-acre threshold. But we're posing the question here, and this is actually kind of follows on some of the comments we already received. Should we be looking at other things? For example, if we're like Metro Class A upland habitat, should we allow for a smaller patch size before we start pulling it out and calling it not significant? Or are there unique resources like oak habitat? And then also we're looking at keeping in the ARLIS database, there's a layer that has HOA protected areas, areas that when a project went through development review, they were required to set aside an area for protection. Some of these are relatively small, but we were thinking we'd still call them out as significant because they were required to be protected. And then, of course, there are parks. And sort of the question with parks is, do we map the whole lot or do we just look at what is actually habitat on that park property? For example, when we're working on the Cooper Mountain work, separate project for the city of Beaverton, we basically said the entire Cooper Mountain Nature Park got a upland wildlife habitat designation with the understanding that the code would allow for some minimal development as needed per the park's plan. So anyway, next slide. And more questions for the group. Let's see, as noted in the memo, we were proposing to consider non-significant isolated habitat patches that are smaller than 2 acres. So kind of looking for the group for your general thoughts on that. Similarly for the homeowners association, kind of keeping those in as significant. We don't actually know what they look like at this point in time. They might be completely degraded, or maybe they've been, managed well or maintained. But anyway, opening up to the group for comments, questions.
So I'm going to take this out of order, I think, and let Teresa start. But then it looks like it's Joy and Fran. And Amanda, you had your hand up. So is that still on from last time, or did you have another question?
Okay. Sorry about that. It should be down.
Okay. All right.
And if we could go back to the last slide, I wanted to just clarify something, Ethan. So there's the little circle, which shows that little bright green patch. Yeah, and so that one is adjacent to the riparian. And I know at one point we were talking a little bit, is that maybe also a criteria? If it's adjacent to riparian, maybe the patch size, it doesn't matter because it is part of that larger area that will be protected as riparian. So that one isn't isolated, where the other ones are kind of more isolated.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for catching that, Teresa. I may have gone a little circle crazy and circled a few too many things.
Sorry, that's all.
So I think that it's Joy and then Fran and then Bruce. Does that sound right?
Hey there. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, just a comment about, I think it would be great to consider, some patches that are smaller than 2 acres. There's some habitat that I think, as you have in that previous slide, that could be unique that, would not be protected. And then also certain species like pond turtles or other wildlife that maybe would, that are Oregon Conservation Strategy species, sensitive species in the state. And it's just not clear how much of that could be removed in this proposal. And so it would be great, and we'd be happy to, keep working with you all on that. And just to mention something before, I didn't want to interrupt, but someone had mentioned connectivity, and ODFW working with the group that was mentioned. We have developed we have developed connectivity maps, and that would be also a really great resource and maybe something to consider of where to determine some significance within, as another filter. And I can forward you all that information if that hasn't been something that's been considered, but it's called OCAMP, the Oregon Connectivity and Mapping Protocol, I believe it's the acronym. But yeah, just a general comment about, we would definitely recommend considering some habitat patches that are less than 2 acres.
That sounds great. And do you guys have mapping for some of those?
Yes.
Types of species or?
Yes, we do.
Great.
And did you have a set of criteria that you used to decide whether something would get identified or not, or like kind of what is your method? Do you have a methodology for?
It's definitely with OCAMP. That was I don't think that they're available publicly right now, but that was definitely an exercise in identifying what is significant for habitat. And a lot of that, I think, would follow some of these riparian corridors, but that just acknowledge, because they're obviously really important, not just for the functions that were mentioned before, water quality, but also migratory avenues for wildlife. So we do have that, and I can provide all of that in an email if that's more helpful to kind of go through or provide more information at any time. And then we also have our the Oregon Conservation Strategy, which that has unique habitat like oak that was mentioned, and other strategy species. And that is a little bit dependent upon what kind of data we have for those habitats. But in the metro area, as others have mentioned, there's a lot of work that's been done with oak already. But yeah, happy to provide any other information.
Great, thanks, Joy.
Thanks.
Yeah, excellent. Was Fran next?
I think it's Fran, and then Bruce.
I have a question and a point. So I don't know if part of this is that ultimately Washington County is going to have a target total of significant natural resource left, you know, as a result of all of this. That's just a thought for you to put into your agenda. But the other part of it is that I'm assuming that a lot of these smaller parcels might be components that add up to the total target, amount that we've got already in SNR. So that question kind of needs to be made behind the scenes about what are you going to do with these targets, and then what are you going to do with these little pieces that add up to the total that we already have identified. And then the last, I lost my train of thought already, but with these different mappings, I'll think about it later. I'll talk to you offline, but it's just the whole concept for the group. Are we as a group going to be providing any input on that idea? Oh, I know, it was mitigation areas. Are mitigation areas going to be considered part of the total mapping inventory? And if so, do we have that information to view? And are these other maps that you're doing going to be available to the TAC? And I'm done for a little while. I've been studying this a long time, so sorry, I got a whole bunch pent up on it.
Those are really good questions. I think to answer the mitigation areas one, and Ethan, correct me if I'm wrong, but many of those homeowner association tracts were mitigation areas, and they were put in as separate tracts. So to the extent that those are identified and retained, or if mitigation was dedicated to a public agency like THPRD or something like that, then again, it might get picked up there. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's correct. And then, there might be things like wetland or stream mitigation that, maybe the HOA layer picks up, or maybe it doesn't. That would have to come from DSL, but they don't have that information in GIS format. It's all files and files and files of documents. But I would say the vast majority of any mitigation, wetland type mitigation, would likely be encompassed by the riparian mapping, because that's where you would be able to actually do wetland mitigation. And if when a developer goes to develop, they have to look at what other encumbrances, and if that shows up, then they'll be well aware of it, and there are restrictions on what they can develop on a mitigation site.
Yeah, I guess to answer that question about whether there's a target, I don't think there's no fixed target. Michelle or Teresa, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
No, there's not a target. I think by adding the metro upland areas, we're looking at a lot more area than what the county area is. And so that's part of our analysis, is we're looking at those areas as potentially adding to here. That doesn't mean that they'll remain in the significance. They may get filtered out through significance. They may get filtered out through the EC analysis. And then when it comes to the regulations, they may be regulated or may not, or there may be mitigation allowed. So we don't have a target, but we are at this point looking at more area than we were before.
And I think that it's Bruce and then Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the thoughtful comments about the oaks. I think for the Park District, we feel that oaks are both a state conservation priority, but they're also local conservation priority. And so even isolated oaks, especially mature trees, are really important to wildlife. So I would suggest that perhaps is an exception to the isolated habitat piece. Otherwise, I do tend to agree that habitat that is contiguous is the most important. On the parks question that Ethan brought up, we would prefer that parks are divided between developed area and natural area, simply because the values and the intended service to the public is very different in those different areas. And to lump them in as one wouldn't serve the public well.
Okay. Matt?
That's all I got. Thank you.
I think it would be helpful to have some understanding of how Metro reached that assumption. How did they get to 2 acres in the first place as being what they consider non-significant, or below 2 acres is what they consider non-significant. I also think it would be worthwhile. So the map you showed, can you go back one slide? So that project where Southwest Amicus and Southwest, I wasn't involved with it, but based upon the comp plan designations and the habitat overlay and the goal 5 corridors that go down through there, my assumption is they had to go through a 422 assessment when they went through and developed that property. It might be helpful to go back and look at some of their findings to figure out why certain areas were not considered significant, and why certain areas were allowed to be impacted and mitigated for.
That's a good point. I mean, we will, as we think about the regulations and the code concepts, we will be going back to case studies, shall we say, looking back at project, what were the processes. So you're right. I think it's really helpful and informative to see that, prior decisions and how those were processed, and how the current regulations did or didn't apply in certain circumstances. So we will be looking at that information, particularly as we think about code concepts.
Well, and it would be helpful, and that might be part of what we're going to talk about today too. But today, when you have a upland area on your property, you have to go through and do your own on-site delineation of what the edge of that habitat is. Understanding what that process is moving forward would be helpful. Is there still a field verification, or does that go away and these boundaries control?
That's a great question, and one which we have not answered yet, because that is really part of the code concepts and then the regulations. In your experience, just since you raised it, do you have thoughts about how that works now? And
well, yeah, I mean, I personally, when I've gone through it before, I've worked with my resource consultant, who's a professional, and who I trust that they know what they are doing. I've worked with them for a long time. They have done a great job identifying what makes sense as the edge of a resource, but that can also be two people could have different perception of what makes sense. So under the existing 422 process, I think it's worked. I mean, if you look at this map, I think you can see that you got a balance of preservation and development, and it was you went through a series of tests to figure out what was important and what wasn't, and that's what we have today. I'm hopeful that that's what we have when we get through this process too.
Right. Of course, but clear.
Yeah, going to the clear and objective. I think we do need to, particularly when we get to the regulation side, we'll have to detail out for the upland stuff. What does that constitute? Is it just forest tree canopy, or is it something that is more of a native looking forest? If we add oaks specifically, is it a single oak or is it a grouping of oaks? If we call something native prairie habitat, what defines that? So, I'm someone who goes out into the field and does what you were just talking about. So I know having some kind of clear something is super helpful, because there's a lot of non-native pasture that some might say, well, that can be restored. Others would say it's not native. It doesn't resemble a native pasture at all. So we'll have to vet through that. And I would welcome some of the other folks on the call who I'm guessing have worked through some of those issues. If you can share some of your lessons learned, would be great.
Ethan, I just took a look at the time, and we just have a minute before we wanted to do our public comment. So, and I know you had one more slide, so if you could quickly do that, and then we'll.
Yeah. Okay, so after we go through the process we were just talking about, there have been a number of cities that have worked on community plans. They're listed here. If you feel like we're missing one, please let us know. But the question is, are any of these ripe enough for us to take the work that you've done or these cities have done and with the assumption that it'll be at a greater level of detail and what will eventually be applied to for that city, can we incorporate that into the work we're doing now? So for that given area, we would take whatever we were just talking about and just ignore and plop in the more detailed effort. But of course, there needs to be, or there's a question of at what stage can we use that data? If you're still in a draft, can we actually use it? If it's gone through public review, maybe that's good enough, or maybe you need it to be, some final stamp on it that says we can use it. Any quick thoughts from folks? I guess particularly folks from the cities.
And Rachel, and we can follow up with you all separately because this may be something that needs some unpacking with your staff and everything to say, okay, this is, this is the status of these areas, these inventories, and it's good. It's been approved, adopted, something. It's ready to go or not. But let's see. I think there's one more slide that actually has those questions on it. And those. Oh, Tracy, you wanted to jump in.
Oh,
I assume Tigard should be on that list too for River Terrace. I don't see him there.
So River Terrace, they haven't done their concept planning, or sorry, their community planning yet. So they wouldn't have done their goal 5 kind of.
Even for the first River Terrace?
Oh, the first River Terrace, yeah, that should be.
Well, so they don't have any area in the unincorporated. It was annexed all at the same time. So there's no city mapping that's needed, or that would be with that district. So.
Yeah. So the only point I wanted to make here is that, so some of these are older ones, like Basalt Creek and Brookman Road. So those definitely we would take what was done. It's more the ones that are going through their comprehensive planning now and have a process happening. And so we would, as I understand it, we would either be taking what was in the Metro, what was on our maps and what was in Metro's inventory, or we would use the more detailed work that the cities are doing. So either way, there will be more in our inventory for these areas. It's just a question of whether we can, whether the cities are far enough along with their more detailed work and their work with, because they'll be doing their own inventories, they're doing their own EC analysis, all of that. So is that far enough along that we can take it, or do we revert back to what was on the Metro stuff? I hope that made sense.
Yeah, Rob, you have a hand up.
Sure. I think I still need to talk about it with some other staff, but what I'm wondering about is does it need to be far enough along today or by October 24 when you adopt it? Because Beaverton is hoping to adopt in the middle. Next spring, hopefully, but it would be, leading up to when this would be effective.
So so the draft inventory is going to need to cover all of the areas in the study area. And that's coming out. We hope to have a draft of it for your next TAC meeting. Now, those areas could have a highlight over them and say, TBD changes are expected in this area based on, changes that the city might adopt, vis-a-vis the Cooper Mountain process or something like that. But I mean, the inventory would, if we don't receive information from the jurisdictions, I think we're going to need to show something so that people can see, okay, there are going to be changes here. And so then it's just a question of, is there anything, rather than using our standardized methodology that we would be applying throughout the rest of the study area, are there, better data available from the jurisdictions for these areas? And again, we can, if it's something that's like very specifically in transition, as Cooper is, then I think it's potentially something that we can highlight. But it would have to be, then we would just use the standard process for the draft, maybe. And again, we can talk about how that looks. But I think for the purposes of the initial draft, we would probably do.
I mean, there's a 40-year gap between like Washington County's inventory and Beaverton's, because ours is, so I mean, and as you know, working on it, it's much more current. So there's a lot of value in this, this current data set.
Absolutely. And this would be the new draft Washington County inventory. So it's going to be much more up to date. It's going to be based on this methodology for that area. So it'll be significantly different than the old Washington County methodology. So yeah, so in either case, there's going to be changes shown in that area. It's just, you're right, the very detailed analysis that's been done for Cooper Mountain as part of concept planning and community planning, obviously that level of detail is that we may as well benefit from that. But but only if you're ready to have it become a part of this draft. If not, we can wait. And you're right, it could probably ultimately be changed out at the end. With that, we're a little bit over time, and so I want to make sure we get to public comment. So with that, I think I'm going to, Ethan, is that okay? So
yeah, that's
some really helpful direction and some great tips on resources on the inventory. So let's see, moving on to the slides, if you could for us, Brandon. Okay, keep going. One more. Public comment, keep going. Here we go. Jumping right through this. Okay. So now, this is our first time doing this, so apologize. I think what we need to do is people will raise their hand in the audience. Hopefully, then Michelle.
I'll keep track of the time. I could put up a big 2-minute timer thing, but we'll see how it goes for a little bit here, and I'll let you know to be brief, and I'll watch it on my screen here for the 2 minutes. It looks like Dave Robinson has had his hand up, and we'll invite you to talk at this time. And if you could just state your name, and we'll get started.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me, Michelle?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Dave Robinson. I'm a resident of unincorporated Washington County. Thank you for all the great information provided. In the agenda and in the documentation, the maps on page 10 and 11 show area north of Tualatin River and west of King City is currently undeveloped and both classified riparian. In fact, Metro has it as class 1 riparian. But then page 15 says water-related habitat continue to follow county's current comprehensive plan, which provides clear policy direction consistent with Title 13. Back on page 14, however, mentions what Teresa just said, that any applicant cities are going to provide their own detailed review of Goal 5 habitats. And so my question is, are areas that are currently identified by Metro and Washington County as riparian or wetland, are they protected from King City's plans to build up to 12 bridges over the ravines that are in that class 1 riparian area along the Tualatin River? And second question is there a procedure to provide checks and balances to city findings that conflict with existing SNR inventory? Third question, will Washington County LUT intervene to provide guidance to King City on protection of existing riparian areas? Question 4, Do CDC Section 422 regulations protect existing SNRs? And final question, can ESEE be imposed to remove existing riparian status? And that's all I had.
And I'm just going to just throw this out, Michelle and Kathy. I mean, this is more about taking comments versus answering questions. And those were a lot of questions there that are pretty detailed. So Dave, I think we'll need to look at that. And we may want to talk with you offline, but I don't think we're prepared to be able to answer that.
No, I completely understand, Teresa.
Okay.
I just wanted it on the oral record.
Okay.
Michelle, can you see if there are other hands up? I don't have a view of that.
Greg Malinowski.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg Malinowski. Live in the Bethany area. So a couple of things. Number one, I did spend 8 years on the board of Clean Water Services, and my discussions with the staff at the time, and it's a little dated, but in trying to do wildlife stuff, as I was reminded, their first job is to make sure the sewage goes to the sewage treatment plant. And their second job is to make sure there's a drainage way so that houses don't flood. And they do a great amount of wildlife work incidental to doing those two things. I'm not sure, in spite of the fact that I know at least two of the current commissioners think they're taking care of wildlife stuff. I'm not sure that they're spending a lot of money on that, and I'm not sure that's part of their mission at this point. I talked about doing some rehab in some streams to make it more, to enhance the wildlife quality there. And it's like, yeah, but Greg, we gotta get that water out of there. We can't put any kind of meanderings or anything that would slow it down if it comes to that. So, I mean, I'm just suggesting that they may not be, I'm not sure they've been budgeted to handle wildlife restoration as a major point of their existence. And just like to point that out. And number two, small places can provide habitat for small animals. If you want elk and bear and stuff, yeah, you need at least 2 acres and probably more. If you're talking frogs and snakes, invertebrates, mink and that kind of stuff, then they can get by on a hedgerow. And if the hedgerow is going from a creek to a woods, then that's their highway to get back and forth. And so I would very much agree with the Park District that they need to separate what's wildlife habitat and what's not. I've seen wildlife habitat in Bethany that is a mowed yard, and that's not really conducive to wildflowers and minks and stuff. So I just wanted to point that out, that I'm not sure it's been properly proven that Clean Water Services is a wildlife rehab. And number two, we're going to have to get beyond saying this is not perfect and pristine anymore. We're going to have to do some rehab. And it may be the important thing is to have an acre of natural area. And if it hasn't been taken care of right. So those are the kind of things I'm worried about.
Okay. I appreciate that. Yeah, just in the interest of time, let's just make sure if there's a lot time left, we can come back around, but let's make sure we don't run out of time. Sure. Thank you. Anybody else waiting to, apologies, I can't see the hands up. So Teresa or Michelle, anybody waiting?
We don't have any other hands raised?
No. Okay, well in that case, Greg, if you have more to share, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to leave anybody without a chance to talk. Yeah.
Sure, that would be fine. That was my big concerns, that we're not getting the idea behind rehabbing. We may have to put up with rehabbing. Even an oak tree, 100-year-old oak tree is a valuable thing. And maybe if we could put more pressure to save that oak and the ground under it and rehab that ground under it than to remove it. And right now, the other thing I would say is, how many times in the last 40 years has upland habitat been protected by the county? I have not seen a lot of examples. It's pretty much a gimme to say it's upland so I can bulldoze it, right? And the answer is almost always yes. And I'm not sure there's any instances where that wasn't yes. So my 2.5 cents, thank you.
Thank you for your time. Okay, I think if we don't have any more comments from the public, anybody, Teresa or
no more hands.
Comments? Okay, all right. So then moving on to just, and this, we're just a few minutes running late, but let's see if you could slide the next slides, Brandon. Okay, and so closing wrap up, next slide. All right. Basically not much to add unless Teresa or Michelle have anything. We're hoping to put a summary of the meeting on the web page prior to your next meeting. We'd hope that you look at that and let us know if we mischaracterized anything. Some great suggestions for resources, by the way, and so we may be reaching out to you as individuals to get more input on that. We're going to be aiming to schedule the next tech meeting in late July or early August, and you'll be getting a scheduling email in the next week or so for us to try and get that on the calendar. I know that's a busy vacation time, so we're hoping that we can find a time that works for folks. And with that, any last questions? And otherwise, thank you all for your time and contributions. Okay, no last questions. Did this format generally work okay for people? I know it's these big virtual meetings are challenging. Let us know if there's any technical. I'm going to try and get a headset so my mic is better. I apologize for that. They said it's a new laptop, but if you all have any suggestions for how we might manage the time better or anything like that, just let us know. Always welcome to give us some advice on that. Otherwise, I think that's it. Almost on time. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Chuck, I think we're done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Okay, have a good rest of your day and try to stay cool.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I got my walk in earlier today, so
yeah.
Thank you.
It's definitely warming up.
I think it went pretty smooth, so thank you. Sure, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll see you on the next go round. Bye-bye.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.